Tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. South Africa is in the firing line again, this time not from fake news and white genocide propaganda that we've seen being peddled by some sects here in South Africa and in the United States of America, but this time around from tariffs. US President Donald Trump, in typical Truth Social fashion, posted a letter slapping a massive 30% blanket tariff on all South African exports starting on August the 1st. He claims we've had years to fix our one-sided trade deals, and now it's payback time. But President Cyril Ramaphosa has hit back, saying the move is based on inaccurate data and that more than half of American goods actually enter South Africa duty-free. The question is this Trump's way of squeezing BRICS-aligned countries? He did come out and say, all of the BRICS countries and those that are aligned to the BRICS bloc will essentially feel the wrath of the United States of America, and he'll be slapping massive tariffs on BRICS-aligned countries. And we are one of the victims of that. And we asked the question, is this personal politic or purely economic? And most importantly, what does this mean for ordinary South Africans? What does it mean for you and I when it comes to jobs, when it comes to the cost of living in an already fragile economy where a lot of us are struggling, really struggling to eke out a comfortable living? To help us break it all down, we're now joined by Redge Nkosi. He's the Executive Director and Head of Research for Money, Banking and Macroeconomics at Firstsource Money. He's a sharp voice on matters of global finance and trade, and this is one that you definitely want to listen to. Redge, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Always a pleasure having you on air.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to talk to you again.
Pleasure's all ours. I think let's start with the big picture and your reaction to it, Redge. What do you make of this 30% tariff on South African exports by the USA? And most importantly, I think the question on every South African's minds right now is, how is this going to affect me personally?
Yeah, indeed. It's a big question. As you noted, the rand went down a bit as a consequence of that, to reflect the consequence or the dire consequences, of this move by the US on this economy. It simply says that each one of us will have less, I suppose, in aggregate in our pockets as a consequence of the move by the United States. So it is worthy reflecting and worthy worrying that an important economy has decided, almost on its own whims, to do as it has done. But it shouldn't surprise any South African at all, because firstly, South Africa, being a friend to Palestine, that's very, very important. Being a friend to Palestine has incurred a lot of wrath, not just from the US, the main supporter of the genocidal activities in Palestine, but in all other allied economies of the US or of the US/Israel relationship. So South Africa has incurred that wrath and therefore has to be punished in some way. But secondly, it's the issue of us being a member of the BRICS. That too is also, problematic to the US, because US, like Europe, are dying economies. All right, they're very errant, and they're going to be very errant going forward. We cannot expect them to behave in the manner they used to behave when they had all of the world under their control. Today, the world is changing and has changed. And therefore, to maintain that superiority, to maintain that theft that has been going on from the African continent by Europe and the US, they have to behave in the manner they're behaving right now. Unfortunately, the horse has bolted. And I do not think BRICS or even South Africa is going to allow themselves to be mistreated by the US. Of course, diplomatically, things may be different. But I think behind the scenes, all BRICS countries, including South Africa, are now ready to take on this issue. Indeed, President Cyril Ramaphosa did voice that, And also, President Lula of Brazil did also indicate quite unequivocally that I think this is unsound, and we're not going to sit down, just accept this type of treatment, given the fact that we are going to be affected as BRICS and indeed South Africa, as I've just said now.
I want to touch on, I think, this, BRICS theme of this conversation, because something that was really, really surprising is the fact that, well, maybe not surprising, because he did mention that all of the BRICS aligned countries will, quote unquote, feel the wrath of the United States of America. And the timing of the announcement of these tariffs came just days after the BRICS meeting in Rio. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, the question would be, how impactful has BRICS been when it comes to the true and lived realities of the economies of the member countries? BRICS countries collectively represent a significant portion of the global economy. I think some projections indicate that there'll be continued growth in their share of global GDP in the next few years. But realistically, when it comes to intertrading, when it comes to being an alternative to the United States of America, and to wean themselves from reliance from Western markets and the United States of America, has BRICS really been that impactful? Has there been agreements that have been put into place and that are felt in reality by the various populations of BRICS member countries, to kind of soften the blow of, as you mentioned, the dying economies of the United States of America and Europe, and some of these pragmatic stances that have been made by Donald Trump?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the BRICS, as you correctly put it, are now far much larger than the G7 collective as a collective, and this means obviously that the US and the EU are feeling the pinch. I mean, just as an example, all right, Russia on its own has made Europe poorer than before. All right, Russia on its own has made Europe suffer dramatically. And right now, Europe is poorer as a consequence of one BRICS member. Now, what does that mean if China comes onto four? If Brazil comes onto four? If Africa comes on? The threat is massive. And the US are in quite a number of ways acting preemptively, saying these fellows, should they indeed come together as they are coming together and begin to trade as they are now trading in their own currencies, the dominance of both the euro and indeed the dollar is going to be washed away. And with that, their economic might, their military might, their social might, and whatever might, technological might, and so on, will begin to be eroded already. Technological might has shifted towards Asia or the global south. That is a big impact, not just for Europe and the US, but the collective West. All right? And that is causing a lot of fear. That is causing a lot of challenges. That's why Huawei, companies like Huawei and so on and so forth, are being blocked in Europe and so on and so forth. The impact of these BRICS countries on the collective West has already been felt and continues to be felt and will continue to be felt as these economies strengthen the relationship and continue to work in a manner that seeks to demean or to degrade the entire Western world. So yes, we cannot, and the US cannot underplay the force that the BRICS is mounting on them, and already these economies are feeling the thing. So I think we should be happy that as a consequence of this, Trump is therefore shouting tariffs and tariffs and tariffs. But what Trump fails to understand is the economics of tariffs do not necessarily hurt those the tariffs have been imposed. It hurts the very economy that imposes them, to the extent that much of the US, the inflation in the US is low as a consequence of importing from countries like South Africa, like China, and so on. Now, if you continue to impose, inflation in the US will mount. That means poverty in the US will continue to rise. There has been rising poverty there, just as much as in Europe. All these are elements that must be factored in. But however, politically, Trump wants to show that he's powerful and so on and so forth and amount. But this is a very unsustainable approach to economic management. And frankly, Trump knows it. It's just it's political bluster that has no future. That's why they even came down from the 145% tariffs against China to somewhere around 30. Why? It's because they understand that the entire US economy depended so much on China and the developing world will begin to melt faster than it is melting right now. So yes, I think it shouldn't be a surprise that Trump is jumping up and down and the entire collective West is in a, if you want, in a mess.
Very, very important points that you're making there. Reg, I want to move on to Pretoria now and President Cyril Ramaphosa. Domestically, there's so much that's been happening. What should his approach be? What's the proper reaction to these tariffs? Does South Africa have any kind of meaningful kind of tariff options, counter tariff options, or are we largely at the mercy of Donald Trump and Washington DC? What should the proper response be from South Africa's government?
I think it's an important question for the listeners because this now then talks to the bread and butter of South Africans. Firstly, there isn't much alternative that South Africa can mount with regard to these tariffs. Because firstly, the component that we export to the US that has given the trade surplus that to us and the US trade deficit, which Trump uses as an excuse, are goods in the very sector that US has not imposed tariffs. Okay, so Trump has not imposed tariffs on platinum, on titanium, and so on and so forth, which account about 37% of the exports to the US from this country. All right, and he has, however, imposed tariffs on manufactured products. So that will be quite pinchy for South Africa. There isn't much South Africa can begin to negotiate because the entire formula that Trump has used is economically unsound. And you cannot begin to negotiate and lessen the burden from a position of incorrectness. So the only way South Africa has to begin to do now is for South Africa to begin to quite urgently begin to diversify away from not just the US, but much of the errant Western world, which we have been dependent on for quite a while. With regard to tariffs, there isn't much South Africa can actually negotiate. Also, just understand this. Trump is saying the deficit is there from their side, but that is deficit only in goods. They have a surplus to us in services, but they don't talk about that. All right. So if you look at the trade itself, they're just basing themselves on a very tiny area, and the trade surplus is also in the areas that they want goods from us, critical minerals. So you see, so they're imposing, at the end of the day, tariffs highly unfairly, even on goods, that we should be selling to them, but not on the goods that they demand from us. So South Africa cannot really negotiate in any meaningful way here. I can assure you, trade economists will agree right across that there isn't much for us to negotiate. The only way out is for the US itself to review those tariffs and see that it's not necessary for them to impose those tariffs. Otherwise, South Africa has to now start diversifying away from these economies as a matter of great urgency. Because the economy obviously is going to suffer slightly. Remember, 70% of our exports go to the US. Okay? Even if I'm saying 70%, a good chunk of those still go to the US without tariffs because Trump has not imposed tariffs on those aspects that they need. Okay, and they're only imposing on cars, and similar type of manufactured goods that are not on the major items that involve our trade with them, which includes minerals and so on. So
I think
South
I think
Africa will obviously suffer.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was interesting for me that you mentioned the different kind of goods that have these tariffs put on them, and the question on AGOA looms large. Would you say this almost signals the end of preferential trade for South Africa when it comes to the AGOA trade deal, and what other alternatives should we urgently be pursuing? You did mention the BRICS bloc and doing business within that bloc. Africa in itself, when it comes to intertrading, is still very much an untapped market. Should South Africa, looking that way a bit more?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. South Africa has to look. Intra-Africa trade has to be sharpened up. BRICS trade has to be sharpened up. And I think one other issue that South Africa has forgotten because of its failure to understand macroeconomics properly is that we should have been developing in this country a high demand component, all right, such that there isn't much need for us to export. Okay, if we were to export, we should export the excess, not almost all or much of our goods. In other words, if domestic demand was to be brought up, but domestic demand can only be brought up if there's high employment in a country. So high unemployment in this country is a consequence of the poor macroeconomic framework and development model that South Africa has adopted, just because it followed the EU understanding of development. If South Africa had listened to alternative voices within the country around how we should structure our economy and what framework we should use, South Africa wouldn't find itself in this mess. So we're calling on South Africa, therefore, that there is an approach which can, in fact, if you want, fool these countries, where you sharpen your own domestic demand instead of having to rely on external demand, which is the exports. So yes, there are quite a number of ways in which South Africa can reverse this so that it cushions itself. But it calls for Cyril Ramaphosa, as he arrives, to hold an urgent endeavor on economic issues with the economists that he has always shunned, the economists who demand that we should move away from the colonial setup of this economy to a modern setup like that of China, like that of Germany previously, like that of Japan previously, and like that of the Tigers previously. Unfortunately, South Africa, because of this, it listens so much to the Europeans who are in this country, the Europeans who own big business here. It has followed a very wrong development path. We are rejecting this path. We have rejected this path quite a number of times. So I'm saying, as part of the process of going forward, President Cyril Ramaphosa must reject this stuff that comes from the IMF, the World Bank, that is all there to vacuum away the resources from this country, from the citizen, to an approach which empowers the citizen. And that approach can easily be found among heterodox economic thinkers. And that will also assist quite, in my view, urgently, but also extensively.
No, definitely. I think we're going to on that note, Redge. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insights. And yeah, looking forward to chatting to you soon as Donald Trump 2.0 continues to unfold and continues to touch everyone's lives, essentially.
Indeed. Thanks very much for having me.
There you go. That was Redge Nkosi helping us unpack one of the biggest international economic stories of the week. A tariff war is never just about numbers, eh? It's about power. It's about politics and people's livelihoods, you and I. And as global alliances continue to shift and America, goes into election mode, smaller economies like ours, South Africa, risks becoming collateral damage. So yeah, we want to hear from you. Is South Africa being punished for standing with BRICS? Is South Africa punished for being friends with Palestine and putting Israel on the International Court of Justice and say, you need to be tried for a genocide? What should be our response? Should we fight back or quietly comply? This is just 4 years of a Donald Trump administration. It's going to come and go. The United States will always be there. South Africa will always be there. This is a phase. We need to weather the storm, as many suggest. And what do you think it will take for us to build economic resilience in a world dominated by big powers like the United States of America? Because say whatever you want about them, they're still the most powerful, most influential economy in the world. It might be slowly be dying. It might be slowly losing the influence and grip that it used to have in the world. But it's still very much a big player and a player that we can't afford to ignore. Send us your thoughts on WhatsApp. Our number is 061 766 0355. Or you can tweet us at Salam Media with the hashtag news and views. And we'll be reading your messages after this short break. But when we come back, we'll be kicking the after the ad break slot with our Africa Focus feature, where we'll be essentially focusing on Kenya and everything that we've been seeing unfolding in about that part of the world. So it's going to be another interesting question. Again, don't forget to engage with us. Our studio line is 061 766 0355. How should Cyril Ramaphosa respond to this 30% tariff that we've been hit with by Donald Trump and the United States of America? Should we comply? Should we fight back? Should we counter tariff the United States of America and be part of this, global trade war that was sparked by the US? Again, keeping in mind that South Africa, in the greater scheme of things, yes, we're a big player here on the African continent, but when it comes to the rest of the global world, I know it's difficult for a lot of South Africans to accept this, but we are not really one of the big boys. So maybe sit quietly, comply, weather the storm of Donald Trump 2.0. It will come to an end ultimately. Donald Trump won't be president forever, and we hope whoever comes after him will rectify some of these crazy executive orders that he has signed and put into place. It's going to be an interesting couple of years under this administration, and it's going to be a bumpy one, but we'll be right here with you to give you everything and anything that you need to know about Donald Trump and how his existence is affecting you personally, whether you're in Pretoria, you're in Welkom, you're in Johannesburg, you're in Captain Park. He's there. He's haunting your life. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues.